Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Dr. Jemma King, the head of BioPsychAnalytics and an external advisor to McKinsey and Co. She is also a former consultant to the Australian Defence Department, as well as the Australian Olympic swim team.
Thanks for having me. I do lots of different things, but primarily I'm a researcher, and I am a research fellow at the University of Queensland here in Brisbane. And I look after PhD students, and we're looking at psychophysiological research. So looking at human performance from the lens of how does your physiology and your psychology interplay to either make you a better person or how inattention to these factors can actually be a detriment to your performance. I also have founded my own consulting firm called BioPsychAnalytics. And within that, I consult to a lot of C-suite executives, management consultants, lawyers, the Olympic team, swim team, and the Australian Institute of Sport, just to name a few.
You mentioned the Olympics, or the Olympic swimmers from Australia that you advise them. So obviously, we're right in the thick of the Olympics right now. Tell us something we can learn from Olympic swimmers or athletes in general and how that can help us perform better in our day jobs.
Yeah, I think with Olympic athletes, when you get to that level, like everybody's super fit, everybody's done an enormous amount of training, they've got this amazing skill set. And I think what differentiates between those that win and those that don't is really a mindset and being able to manage your stress under pressure, and being able to harness that stress and to use it to optimize your performance rather than letting the stress getting the better of you and choking under pressure. And so a lot of my work with Olympic athletes was really looking at getting them to understand how stress impacts their physiology and how that physiology has a bidirectional relationship with their psychology, and then how that psychology impacts their performance. And so it was really looking at educating them on the basic human behavior principles around stress, coming at it from, an evolutionary perspective, teaching them why do our bodies act the way they do under pressure, and then how can you harness that? And then also looking at getting a lot of psychophysiological granularity in their perception. So that really means that, okay, if you feel something, it's not just bad, but looking at there's different categories of bad. So what is making you feel bad exactly? Is it coming from your body? Is it coming from your mind? And then being able to understand how to get yourself out of that bad state and into a good state at will. And sort of like, having mastery over your psychology and physiology. And, I think this was really a bit of a game changer in terms of, bridging these two usually disparate domains. So physiologists used to be over here and psychologists used to be over there, and never did they meet. But I think now, particularly with the work we're doing, we're starting to see the impact they have on each other and how you can, improve performance.
Right. Well, and this year obviously was so stressful, right? Probably the most stressful Olympics because of COVID. Is there anything we can learn from how COVID affected athletes and how COVID is affecting us?
Yeah, I think that the uncertainty was the killer with COVID, because so many of the athletes, they didn't know whether they could train, they didn't know if they could go to that camp. They, a lot of them had to move so they could get out of their hotspots, and so this disruption was really problematic. And I think this is one of the lessons that we learned with my work with the Special Forces, is creating certainty within uncertainty. And how do you maintain equanimity when the whole world is in chaos? And so we got a lot of those lessons about, focusing on process, focusing on the controllables, understanding when your physiology was starting to get the better of you. And we learned a lot from those guys who had been in the most stressful, the most uncertain, places on the planet. And we distilled those lessons, brought them back, and transmuted them to something that the athletes could work with. But I think, also there's the notion of the audience effect. most of these athletes are really used to being in a performance environment where there's screaming people and there's lots of hype. And for some athletes, that was terrifying, particularly some of the younger ones. And I think maybe not having all of that hype could have, improved their performance, where other athletes, they love that energy. They sort of build a riff off that, the clapping and the screaming, people yelling their name, and that would really like propel them to go faster. And so, we spoke about, have an introspect about how do you think the lack of audience would impact your performance. I think it's probably got a lot to do with introversion and extroversion.
Right. Well, you've studied a lot to do with the brain and emotional intelligence. Can you talk to us about that in general in very basic terms, and so we can wrap our heads around sort of that as we sort of consider how we perform in the workplace?
Yeah, so emotional intelligence, I think, it's been around for 20 years, this notion, but I think people are really starting to understand the importance of it. And I think there's been more in organizations, more of an effective revolution where people go, wow, this stuff is not only really important from a moral perspective of understanding how people feel and being and caring about it, but having an emotionally intelligent workforce actually makes you more successful and costs you less money. And I'll talk about how that plays out. So the basic principle of emotional intelligence, and there's many models, and as an academic, people fight over which models are more accurate. But so I use the model out of Yale, and it's basically emotional intelligence is the ability to first perceive emotions in yourself. So understanding when you're starting to get emotional, like you can feel it, and having that acknowledgement and perception of it, but also being able to perceive emotions in others. So that's like micro emotion detection, just feeling the environment, like also in groups of people, even when you're on Zoom, understanding when someone's disengaged, someone's listening, someone doesn't agree with you, just looking at those little fluctuations in facial expression, emotional, vocal tone, pauses, so that's emotional perception. Then it's also emotional understanding. So thinking, why is that person having that emotion? Or why am I having that emotion? And it's also about understanding that emotions can, two emotions that would seem seemingly opposite can mix and transmute into a third emotion. So it's about emotional forecasting, having a deep understanding of the way emotions mix and combine and transmute. So for instance, an example of mixed emotions is you look at a picture of your grandmother and you feel both happy but melancholy at the same time because you miss her, but you're looking at this picture when you had a wonderful day. So two opposite emotions, and you can understand they're disparate, but because you have emotional understanding, you can understand how you feel from that. And so, yeah, emotional understanding of others is really important. So your boss is really annoying you, and okay, if I am angry right now, this is not going to be good for me. And that goes into that third component of emotional intelligence, is emotional facilitation or use of emotion. So knowing how you can use your emotions to benefit yourself in the moment. So knowing that if you are emotionally expressive in that way to your boss, that's going to be advantageous to you. Or if you're not emotionally expressive, that could be better for you. And that goes into the fourth component, which is emotional management. So being able to dampen your emotions when you need to, or being able to upregulate your emotions when you need to. So say for an Olympic athlete, you're feeling nervous, how do you downregulate? But then you don't want to downregulate too much. You need to be able to amp yourself up and get yourself hyped and get the adrenaline surging through your veins so you perform better. And it's also, I suppose, for leaders or for team people running teams, that the team's got a certain job to perform. How do you either ramp the team up, or how do you get them down regulated so they can concentrate? So it's not only emotional management of yourself, but emotional management of those around you. So that's kind of like academic model of emotions in a nutshell.
No, that's really helpful. Now, what about with Zoom and in virtual conferences? Now we've had over a year and a half now to learn about best practices. But when we apply EI to Zoom conferences, is there one takeaway or one or two tips that you tell all your clients and people who are getting guidance from you?
Yeah, so this is extremely difficult because humans have emotion detection mechanisms in their brain that really sap from the environment all of the different inputs. So when you are meeting someone face to face, not only are you looking at their eye contact, their body positioning, their vocal intonation, but we also detect pheromones. So new research has shown that that gut feeling that you get is actually due to the fact that you're sampling pheromones coming off that person into your subconscious. And so these are things like the smell of fear, or if someone is not telling the truth, they will emit a different chemo signaling signature. And this is where you get that gutting, so you go, oh, you have that feeling about someone. It's actually like millions and millions of data points coming into your brain working them out and giving you a feeling, an intuition about what to say or what not to say, or what that person's intention is. So when you go online, like, you lose like 70% of this information and you're left literally with just a face. There's often timing delay, which is super important. Emotional detection really does take into account tempo, timing, which is off on Zoom. But also you're missing the bottom half of their body. And also you're not getting the chemo signaling. And so we're really kind of put behind when you're trying to make inferences about someone's behavior or intention when you're online. And so what I say, and it's also very cognitively draining. And we know that if you're looking at your own face on Zoom, your metabolic cost of that is about 30% more than if you don't see your own face. So not only is it harder to understand what's really going on, but it's also really metabolically draining, and you can get exhausted by the end of the day. I think all of us have had this incredible Zoom fatigue where at the end of the day you just feel totally fried because you're having to pay attention so hard to try and pick up all of everybody's intentions, and it's all like kind of glitchy. And also we're not getting the oxytocin, which is the attachment, the feel-good hormone, when you're in person. So when you're in person, you might touch someone on the shoulder, or you might laugh together, or just being close to people care about you really increases your levels of oxytocin, which is a cortisol stress hormone antagonist. So very, very difficult to navigate this Zoom world. So what I typically say is half of your meeting should be done without the camera on, or absolutely definitely get online, make sure you've got nothing in your teeth, turn off your self view so you can't see yourself, and then so you can maybe see the other attendees, but you're not getting that cognitive drain from looking at yourself. Or even if you really want to know how someone's doing in your team, call them. And we know from research that people's emotion detection is much greater by just vocal input rather than having vocal plus visual input, because the visual input distracts you. Right. And people can pretend they're okay, they can put on makeup, they can change the lighting, you can't really tell if they're not okay, but it's much easier to detect fluctuations in people's emotional state through the voice only. And in fact, interestingly, there's some insurance companies that will employ the visually impaired because they know that their auditory cortex of their brain is much more highly developed, and they are much better able to detect lies and non-truths than visual normal sighted people.
Huh.
So
That's really interesting.
Fact. Yeah, so if you want to know how someone is, call them.
That is the best advice.
Yeah.
Because right now we're going toward a hybrid sort of approach. Right now, obviously we're trying to open up, but variants are getting in the way. But so we're starting to have meetings, but Zoom seems to is going to stay, right? So should we mix up meetings? Should we take a lot of breaks? There's different guidance here. Is there any sort of best practices as we look toward more in-person meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the major findings of recent is the concept of psychological safety and trust, and that in order to be a high-performing team, you really need to have psychological safety within that team and trust between the members. And so this is work from Amy Edmondson out of Harvard. So she's the one who coined the term psychological safety. And interestingly, Google, they did this project Aristotle, where they looked at, thousands and thousands of data points over many years to try and ascertain what are the factors that create a high-performing team. And what they found is that psychological safety was the most important factor for a high-performing team. It's the construct under which all other constructs nested, which is really interesting for Googlers. You think that these fluffy concepts wouldn't be important to them, but they found it was really, really super important. And I think with that, I will work with the military, they're starting to understand this as well. And everybody's starting to understand trust and psychological safety is important. So then we're left with this massive problem. How do you, create, foster, and maintain trust and psychological safety in an online environment? Very, very difficult. And so what the research is saying is that at some stage, you really should have an in-person meeting with team members at least once, so they can establish communication norms. It's kind of like dogs sniffing each other's out. You really kind of like get the essence of what that person's about. How much can you trust them by seeing them in person? And then, you can have effective teams and meetings on Zoom, so long as you have some pretty specific rules, and it's around that a certain proportion of the meeting is spent doing that social lubrication, doing that banter, talking about our lives, talking about non-work topics, so you can build up that feeling of social capital, familiarity, similarity, likeness. You can see a depth to that person beyond just their work role. And you actually have to make a concerted effort to do this. It doesn't happen organically like it does, in the lift or at the drink fountain. You have to make a concerted effort to create space where you can foster and maintain psychological safety and trust. And there's a formula for trust. In order to trust someone or to be perceived as trustworthy, you have to be A, B, C. So you have to have ability. So people need to know that you know what you're talking about. Then there's B, benevolence. So people need to know that you actually care about them. And then you need to demonstrate this consistently. So just think A, B, C. And so with Zoom and online communication, the benevolence part becomes quite difficult. So that's where you have to actively engage in benevolent, belonging indicator type behaviors.
That's great advice. Really great advice. Now, what about you deal with a lot of leaders? There's a lot of leaders, listening in on this, and innovators and entrepreneurs. Any lessons that you can impart for them to become better leaders?
Yeah, I think the entrepreneur space is super interesting because anyone who's an entrepreneur has sucked the bone marrow out of them to get ahead, to get where they are. But you're doing every job. It's thankless. There's like so much uncertainty. You've got to put in everything in order to get, to reap the benefits. And they work very long hours, and it's lonely and it's stressful and it's, uncertain. So, if you really want to be a great leader, I think, and this is what we teach within McKinsey executive leadership programs, you have to lead yourself first. If you can't manage yourself, there's no way you can be respected as a team leader. There's no way you can even care about the others around you, and therefore you can't lead an organization. And so it sounds really boring and woo-woo, but self-care is critical. And it's like, I like to use the analogy of, like deep sea divers, guys that go at depth. They know that if they go at a certain subsurface, so many meters below subsurface, they have to go into a decompression chamber so they don't get the bends, right? It's just science. Otherwise, they get nitrogen bubbles into their joints. It's super painful and they damage themselves. And I think entrepreneurs really need to see themselves as deep sea divers, that the amount of time you spend, at your computer, plugging away thinking hard, not sleeping, you need to spend equal amount of time in some kind of decompression chamber to eliminate the negative effects of that deep dive or that lack of sleep or whatever, because you can't get away with it, right? It's just science, it's physics. Like if you don't sleep, if you don't eat, if you don't move, it will catch up on you. It's just basic biology, basic physics, and no one gets away scot-free. And you want to be a marathon runner. You don't want to be a sprinter. You want to be in the long haul for, weeks, days, and months, and hopefully years. And therefore, you need to take care of the machinery that's going to get you there. Okay, so that means, and I think there's just some really basic things you can do. If you can't sleep much, at least sleep consistently. If you're going to bed late, at least go to bed late at the same time every night. And we've found from all the data with Whoop that this is critical for performance. Be careful about what you put in your body. Like if you had, a really expensive, McLaren P1, you would not be throwing cans of Coke down the engine. Treat your body the same way. Stop throwing things in your body that create inflammatory markers, because they take metabolic energy to deal with and get rid of. And you need to really engage in energy management as a entrepreneur. Your energy system is literally like your metric of success. So be very careful about what you're putting into your body. Also move, get out. We know from a lot of research that putting pressure on you've got pads in the bottom of your feet, and what they do is they increase the amount of oxygenated blood to your brain by 20 or 30%. So if you want to solve a problem, you want to get creative, you want to think, you want to go into a negotiation on your game, go for a run or walk beforehand. And we also know that when you put pressure on your bones, you release a hormone called osteocalcin. And this osteocalcin has been found to increase spatial reasoning and your memory. So, and we know this from NASA and dementia patients who don't walk very much, really does impact IQ points and your ability to recall. So they're my hacks for entrepreneurs: sleep consistency, eat well, and move your body. It's all the things your grandmother told you to do. Nothing new here.
Right. And I think what you're saying is you don't have to be a marathon runner. You just have to do a minimum amount of exercise, and you just have to be thoughtful about what you put in your body and get into a routine of sleep. Really?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Walking meetings.
Done, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, as you know, COVID has stressed out on all of the planet, right? And even though we were home, most of us, it was hard to keep those routines. And
I think that what happens under stress is stress is a very primitive response. It's been adapted to make us successful in the savannas of East Africa. So when you were stressed back then, you know what you had to do? You either had to run at that thing with a club or run away from it, right? So it was a very physically orientated response. And you're sitting at home, trapped in four walls, in front of a computer, getting all of these stress responses, and it kicks off by just thinking about something stressful. And so every cell in your body is saying, run, but you're here stuck in front of your computer. So, your biology is banging up against your, this stress response and our environment. And it's incredibly frustrating.
Right.
So that's why you have to move when you're stressed. You've got to burn off the cortisol, burn off the adrenaline, so you can reset and start to think, again.
Absolutely. Now, you talk about teamwork in some of your research. Tell us the latest findings in, how do we collaborate better? Are there certain tips that you can impart upon us?
Yeah, so currently with this executive leadership program, we're looking at psychological safety and the biological, psychophysiological state of the leader and how this impacts the team. And so, as I spoke about before, if you're a boss, you've had a terrible night, you've had a fight with your partner on the way to work or before your Zoom, this stuff is contagious. So we talk a lot about emotional contagion, and you have to be very careful about your emotional state going into a meeting or going into some presentation, because people smell fear and stress. And it's a hunter-gatherer self, protection mechanism that our clan could pick up the danger signals just by smelling or looking at one person. And we're very, very good at detecting stress in other people, and we also catch it very, very quickly. So I think for leaders, that you have to be very cognizant of your emotional state before you interact with your team. And I think that, with so much uncertainty in the world, people don't know like where they belong, or whether they're going to have a job next week, or where do they sit in the scheme of things. So I think as a leader, one of the best ways to foster psychological safety is to actively and frequently and often speak in terms that ingratiate belonging, that use belonging indicators in all of your feedback. So for instance, if you've got you have to do a performance review for one of your subordinates, and you need to give them negative feedback, you would say, you'd preface the negative feedback by, I'm telling you this because next time, when we get this client on board, in the future, when you are doing this with our organization, you will be better. And so what that does on a neurobiological level is humans are constantly looking for in-group, out-group indicators. We're constantly scanning the environment. Do I belong? Am I going to get kicked out from the clan? Do they want me? Where's my place here? And I think recent research out of Nature showed that 70% of humans' thought is actually socially moderated thoughts. It's all about our social place in the world. Because from a hunter-gatherer perspective, if you were rejected from a clan or you were cast out from your tribe, it meant sure, certain death, and a terrible, horrible, lonely death, violent death. So humans have got this really strong inbuilt rejection detection mechanism in their brain. We're constantly looking, are we in, are we out? And so in modern societies, teams are like modern clans. And so people spend a lot of their time thinking about their place in that team. And if you're feeling uncertain about, whether you're valued, whether you've got longevity, a very good percent of your cognitive resources are going towards thinking about that rather than going towards thinking about the job. So if you make your team members feel uncertain, you literally got a team that's running on half a brain. And the remedy for this is belonging indicators. So if you can preface every meeting or every interaction with something that sort of anchors that person to the clan, to the team, and makes them feel like they've got a future, you will get so much more out of that person than if you just talk normally. It's a secret hack for like really placating that primitive brain and making people feel valued.
That makes so much sense, and thank you for that hack. I'm definitely going to use that.
Do it with your relationships with, there's a really interesting study where they looked at people who had gotten on Tinder, and they did a linguistic analysis of their script of what they spoke about. And in those pairs where future dates were talked about, 60% more money was spent on that date. So if the girl was like, oh, so where should we go on our next date? He ordered the lobster. He ordered the French champagne.
Oh my God.
They didn't speak about the future dates. And that's just a great analogy for like, how do you keep good employees? How do you, if you've got a really valued employee, tell them they're going to be here next week. And they'll put in so much more hard work, and they want to go the extra mile for you.
That makes so much sense. This has been great. Jemma, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.